Hello and welcome to ChurchTherapy.com's pastor training videos. I'm Kristen Kinsevich, licensed mental health counselor on staff at East Coast International Church in Lynn, Massachusetts. Today we're going to be talking about the church's response to mental health. As you may have read from my blog, ChurchTherapy.com, I write about a model that I have been working on for the last 10 years called church therapy, in which a counselor who is professionally licensed is on staff at the church. It's a little bit different from some other models that are out there. You have a few different options right now that kind of exist within the realm of the church. One option is, of course, to do nothing. So there are plenty of churches that really aren't aware of or addressing or choosing to do anything about mental health issues. Sometimes they may view them as spiritual issues. Maybe they don't really know if mental health issues are actually legitimate. And so they may kind of do nothing about them. Other churches have some counseling in place, but it's usually done by the pastors. Sometimes this might fall into the biblical counseling realm or pastoral counseling. And these are certainly different from a mental health therapy type of position, but certainly it's an effort to try to help people's emotional wounds and things that they're facing. Then another model is some churches have created counseling centers that are maybe in a close by location or affiliated with the church in some way, but the counselors aren't really functioning on the church staff. They're there in that practice, and perhaps they go to other churches, or they're maybe perhaps disconnected from the actual staff functioning of the church. Then there's plenty of churches that really are happy to refer out to other Christian counselors in the area. And so that would be, the pastor has a list of counselors that are in practice, and they send people to those practices when there's a need. Church therapy is basically bringing mental health services in-house. So it's part of the church's response to say, we want to be a part of the solution in addressing mental health needs. As we talk more as a nation about mental illness, just statistics are coming out a little bit more clearly as to how many people are really facing a mental illness challenge. The National Alliance for Mental Illness gives us some stats, and I'm going to actually put a link in with this video on my blog where you'll be able to click on the infographic for what NAMI puts together. But 1 out of every 5 adults in America experience some kind of mental illness within any given year. That means maybe they experience a depression, or maybe they have some anxiety or panic attacks. Certainly there are some that have more severe or chronic mental illness. That's about 1 in 25 American adults. And so for them, that's something that's going to continue on for a long time, as opposed to being a brief kind of encounter with a mental health issue. Half of all chronic mental illnesses begin by the age of 14. So certainly when we think about youth ministry, we're looking at how are we catching these things early on? How are we noticing the signs for those things? 1 in 100 American adults live with schizophrenia, which of course is going to be a chronic and severe mental illness, and that's going to be more maybe obvious or outwardly noticeable than certain types of other illnesses like depression or anxiety that can sometimes be very internal. 2.6 American adults live with bipolar disorder. That's a really tricky one in terms of understanding the dynamics of the emotional health and spiritual health, because sometimes those kind of weave together in a person's way of thinking, where it really overlaps a lot with the way they're talking about their spiritual lives. So it's very hard to kind of separate and tease out the emotional health and the spiritual health, which is why church therapy suggests that counseling be right there within the church setting as a way of weaving together emotional healing and wholeness with spiritual development and discipleship. In this model, the pastors and the counselors are working hand in hand together, kind of a wraparound service. In the secular world, that's what we would call it, a wraparound services, where you might have a psychiatrist and a caseworker and a therapist, all kind of working together, maybe a group therapy leader or something. And this team kind of would meet and talk about, the case maybe, and talk about how to help people in the best way. They would have a treatment plan that everybody is on board with. Church therapy might not be quite that formal, but it's similar in the sense that the pastors and the counselors are all on the same team to help this person grow in the ways that they want to grow. Certainly the person's autonomy is very important in this process, and their rights as a person to decide who gets to talk about them. But usually people who are in this model have no problem signing releases. In fact, they're usually very receptive to the idea that the counselor that they're going to see is someone that they're familiar with. The office is in a building they're familiar with. They want the counselors and the pastors to be able to help them in a united way, and they see how it really works well together because everyone is moving in the same direction to help them. Sometimes when you have a referral kind of situation, whether the church has its own counseling center and they send people there, or whether they're referring out to a private practice, in those situations, there's really often a communication breakdown between the counselor and the pastor. And what happens in those situations often is that the pastor is discipling the person, helping them move forward spiritually in certain directions, and then the counselor is helping them move forward emotionally. And you may have two perfectly amazing paths that you're sending someone down, but if the counselor is leaning towards this direction and the pastor is leaning toward this direction, both might be really great, but it can be a little confusing for the person in terms of kind of the unified message of what are the goals, what is wholeness look like for this person emotionally, physically, spiritually, kind of in all areas. Similarly, if you have often there's community health centers or clinics where they have a physician, a primary care physician and a counselor, and they work in the same practice. Similarly, they would have much more of a cohesive communication about, does this person need medication? What are some of the ways we can help this person the best? And really, we're also kind of mimicking that idea where the pastors and counselors are really joining together to decide what strategy works the best. And so certainly, again, this is not something that you would do without a person's permission or in a way that would somehow undermine the autonomy of that person. But you would really want to do it with the heart of really helping this person grow and move forward in the ways that they are articulating that they would like to grow and change. Certainly, if the church is doing our jobs, and especially if you're in a more urban area, these statistics that I talked about earlier of 1 in 5 in a given year adults are experiencing some kind of mental health issue, or 1 in 25 that have an acute chronic mental illness. If we are doing our job as a church and we're in a heavily populated area, my hope, honestly, would be that the church would be having a higher percentage, maybe 2 out of 5, that are dealing with a mental health issue, because you're attracting people who have some level of brokenness, and you're saying we as a church are not only willing but ready and prepared to respond to all of the needs that you're bringing. Imagine you sit down with a pastor, and this has happened many, many times in our church context. Someone sits down with one of the pastors and shares something, maybe a trauma in their life or a depression that they're struggling with, and they have never told anyone in their whole lives about this thing. And so they begin to open up and share that with the pastor. Now imagine if you're that person, you finally feel safe enough to trust this pastor to tell him or her what it is you're struggling with. And instead of their response being, okay, we know what to do with this, here's how we're going to help you in this regard, they hand you a card and they say, go to this building where you've never been, talk to this person you've never talked to before, and tell them all of that stuff. Because I'm working with you over here, and you need to go over here for the big stuff. Honestly, that's how it comes across to people more often than we'd like to think. I know that's not the intent or the heart of the pastor, and it's good for pastors to recognize where their area of expertise ends and where a professional counselor is needed. But when church therapy is happening and the professional counselor is there on staff for the purpose of meeting these needs, then you communicate as a church, we expect these problems to be present in a pretty high percentage of the population here. We know what to do, we have equipped ourselves to respond, and we're offering the community more mental health services rather than just kind of going with what currently exists, which is honestly often limited. So we are being part of the solution in providing mental health care that is both biblically sound and theologically wise, and psychologically and biologically sound as well. So I hope that gives you a little flavor for church therapy. If you want to read more, check out my blog, churchtherapy.com, and have a great day. Hope to see you next time.